Part 11. The terror had frozen them into statues, but the city was not done moving. The earth beneath their boots began to vibrate, a deep subsonic tremor that rattled the teeth in their skulls and sent waves through the mud-choked streets. The rain-slicked mud brick walls groaned, hairline fractures spiderwebbing up the ancient dwellings as the storm clouds split open above the ziggurat. Out in the crowded Market Avenue, the two sicarios who had broken rank were still running, blindly shoving through the silent, shifting phantoms of the ancient dead. Then came the impact. It was a sound like a mountain collapsing into the sea. From the bruised yellow storm canopy descended a limb, a colossal pale pillar of corded muscle and calcified bone, easily 40 feet tall. It didn't strike like a beast. It slammed down with the careless, crushing weight of an architect stepping on an ant. The first running sicario was flattened instantly. The stone beneath him shattered, spraying a geyser of black silt and crimson water into the air. Before the second man could even scream, another giant form materialized through the torrential rain, stepping over the mud brick rooftops. Its upper body was lost in the storm clouds, a towering titan of ancient pale geometry, but its hand descended, a wide, sprawling rake of jointed bone that swept through the avenue. It scooped up the remaining runner along with 3 animal-drawn carts and a dozen phantom inhabitants, lifting them effortlessly toward the roaring pyres atop the ziggurat. The second sicario's final scream was cut short, swallowed by the thunder. The shockwave from the giant step hit Gavilan's group like a physical wall, throwing 2 of the shivering sicarios onto their faces in the muck. The paralyzing trance broke. The sight of the towering titans hunting in the storm restored the primal instinct that horror had stolen. Run. Up! Get up! Gavilan roared, the cold, jagged authority slamming back into his throat. He grabbed Sapo by the tactical vest, hauling the massive gunner off his knees. Movement! We move or we get stepped on! Mace's weapon snapped up in an instant, her eyes locking onto the colossal shapes moving through the rain above the rooftops. The despair in her face hardened back into raw tactical survival.
Gavilan's right. Backs against the river walls. Stay under the overhangs.
She turned to the 5 huddled sicarios, kicking one in the boot to shock him into action.
Move your asses. Move.
Sapo wiped the black mud from his face, his chest heaving as he hauled his heavy machine gun back into his arms. The sickness was still in his gut, but the sight of a creature 40 feet tall made the nausea vanish beneath an ocean of adrenaline. He fell into step right behind Gavilan, his eyes scanning the storm sky. Rico slammed his useless scanner into its chest pouch, pulling his sidearm. Which way, boss? Where are we even going? Away from the open streets, Gavilan shouted over the now deafening roar of the rain and the Titan's footsteps. Inland, toward the base of the ziggurat. The big things can't step into the narrow channels. Even Cuchillo was pulled from his catatonic trance. As the ground shook with the giant's second step, he snapped his hand out of the bloody river silt. He didn't speak, but his wide, glassy eyes tracked the towering limbs in the clouds as he scrambled to his feet, falling into the middle of the stack behind Mace. The remaining 8 unnamed sicarios, shaken, bloody, and entirely out of their depth, didn't need a second order. They formed a tight, frantic circle around the fingers, their rifles pointed upward at the sky, pushing forward through the mud brick alleyways as fast as their legs would carry them. They didn't know what lay at the base of the ziggurat. They didn't know if the ancient city had an exit, or if the idea was simply driving them into a trap. But as the thunder rolled and the towering shadows shifted in the yellow rain, one truth was crystal clear. To stop was to die an even more pointless death. To stay in the open was to be painfully crushed. And so, the remnants of Gavilan's army ran deeper into the drowning world, chased by the footfalls of giants. The alleyways were narrow, claustrophobic stone trenches choking on sewage, rain, and the ancient dead. Gavilan led from the front, his boots splashing through ankle-deep torrents of dark, river-tainted water. Above them, the mud-brick walls leaned inward so steeply that the bruised yellow sky was reduced to a jagged ribbon of storm clouds. Thump. The ground heaved. A block of mud-brick masonry loosened near the top of a dwelling and crashed into the alley, missing Sappho by inches. Through the gap above, they caught a sickening, fleeting glimpse of a pale, jointed knee the size of a 3-story building passing by in the main avenue. The sheer wind generated by the giant's movement blew through the alley like a gale, carrying the freezing scent of ancient copper and ozone.
Keep tight. Watch the roofs.
Mace barked from the rear, her eyes darting to the sagging wooden overhangs. Boss, the ground is soft, Rico yelled over the downpour, his boots slipping on the slick, silk-covered stones. If we get trapped in a dead end, we keep moving, Gavilan snapped, not looking back. The ziggurat has stone foundations, solid rock. Nothing steps on us if we get under the terraces. The narrow passage opened briefly into a small, sunken plaza, but it was no refuge. The square was filled with dozens of the phantom inhabitants, men, women, and children clad in soaked, dark rags, kneeling in the mud around a communal hearth that was burning with that same unquenchable amber fire. They were chanting in a flat, monotone murmur that hummed beneath the sound of the storm. As Gavilan's stack burst into the plaza, the phantoms didn't look up, but the floor beneath them began to shift. The mud wasn't just mud anymore. Thick silver roots, the exact same umbilical cords that had tethered the infected in the foyer, were riding up through the cracks in dark stone paving. They coiled around the ankles of the kneeling phantoms, fusing them directly into the earth. Don't touch the cords! Jump! Gavilan bellowed, leaping over a pulsing knot of silver wire. Sappho plowed through the kneeling crowd like a battering ram, his massive frame clearing a path. Cuchillo followed in a blur, his glassy eyes wide, effortlessly stepping over the writhing roots as if he were walking on air. 2 of the remaining 8 unnamed sicarios weren't as fast. A sicario named Morales slipped in the mud, his legs sliding into a cluster of silver threads. The cords instantly whipped around his tactical boot, burrowing into the leather with a wet, tearing sound. Help! Help me! Morales shrieked, falling backward into the muck. His partner, Standard Sicario Ramirez, turned to grab him, but the silver cords surged upward, wrapping around Morales' chest and dragging him down into the fluid silt beneath the stone paving. The mud swallowed him whole in 3 seconds flat, leaving only a few rising bubbles of amber liquid. Leave him! Run! Mace grabbed Ramirez by his vest and threw him forward just as a giant pale heel slammed down into the plaza behind them, shattering the hearth and pulverizing the remaining phantoms in a single, silent instant. They broke out of the labyrinth at last, tumbling onto the massive, wide plaza at the immediate base of the ziggurat. The structure was staggering up close. The first terrace rose 80 feet above them, constructed of massive, dark basalt blocks, held together by black pitch that wept continuously in the rain. High above, the sacrificial pyres cast a blood-red glare down the gargantuan central stairway. Here, under the massive stone overhang of the first tier, the giant titans couldn't step directly without striking the ancient pyramid itself. A giant shape waded through the storm clouds 100 meters away in the city, its sprawling, multi-jointed torso looming over the mud-brick roofs, but its attentions focused out toward the river. Gavilan collapsed against the freezing basalt of the ziggurat's base, his chest heaving, his carbine resting across his knees. We're out in the open, Sappho panted, dropping his heavy weapon onto a stone step and slumping beside him. Mace scanned the perimeter, her face wet with a mixture of dark rain and sweat.
We can't stay down here on the ground, Gavilan. The mud is alive, but look at the steps.
Gavilan looked. Rising up the central staircase of the ziggurat, carved deep into the stone, were hundreds of narrow, shallow channels. Running down these channels, defying the rain, was a thick, glowing stream of amber product, flowing down from the pyres at the summit like liquid gold. and sitting halfway up the steps, completely untouched by the rain, was Lucio. He was waiting for them, holding a small oil lamp that cast no shadow.
Why do you keep crawling forward?
Lucio's voice didn't drift. It struck them cold and sharp as a scalpel.
Is it arrogance, or are you simply too stubborn to realize you aren't surviving in this place, you're simply being...
Experience.
Lucio tilted his head, his white eyes piercing the dark downpour. He slowly turned his gaze past Gavilan, past Mace, locking onto the shadow behind them. A thin, hideous smile spread across the boy's pale face.
Look at Cuchillo.
Lucio whispered, a soft, malicious purr echoing off the stone.
fully embracing his calling.
Gavilan and Mace spun around. The remaining unnamed sicarios weren't standing guard. They were on the ground. Cuchillo stood in the center of the whetstone, his tactical knife buried in flesh, his face completely blank. Sicarios lay in the mud around him, their throats neatly, silently unzipped almost completely from their shoulders. Cuchillo was currently his hands moving with precise, methodical rhythm as he gutted the last man, pulling the wet, steaming coils out into the torrential rain without a single sound.
He stopped fighting what you just don't want to accept.
Lucio said, his voice rising from the stairs like a death sentence.
He realized what you really are to this place. Not soldiers or invaders on a raid, but memories. Come now, Lieutenant. Bring what's left of your hand up the steps. I think Cuchillo will be staying here. And as I've said before, a thought can only wander for so long.
Part 12. Mace's finger tightened over the trigger of her carbine, the metal cold against her skin. She stared at the bloody ruin Cuchillo was making of the last sicario. But she didn't fire. What else could they do? The boy who had been their scout, their edge, was completely hollowed out, replaced by an obedient instrument of the house. To stay and try to pull him back was impossible. To shoot him felt like a waste of the only thing they had left, momentum. To linger at the bottom of the pyramid meant waiting for the massive, pale limbs to finish wiping the mud brick alleys clean. Leave him, Gavilan finally rasped. His voice was completely devoid of emotion, a dead sound in the dark. We walk. They turned their backs on the slaughter. Sapo, Rico, Mace, and Gavilan, the final four, began the grueling ascent up the colossal basalt steps, following the glowing amber runoff upward. The climb was an agonizing, silent march. The heavy rain washing the black silt from their armor but doing nothing to cleanse the exhaustion seeping into their bones. From the perspective of the bruised, swirling storm canopy above, the massive scale of the ziggurat reduced the four remaining fingers to insignificant, crawling specks. Stripped of their 50 men, their medic, their shield, and their scout, the illusion of a military raid had completely evaporated. They did not look like soldiers taking a compound, trudging upward through the dark, guided only by the sickly light of the runoff. They looked exactly like cattle being slowly, methodically herded up a ramp toward the killing floor. No one spoke. The next move, the next plan, the next target, none of it mattered. The only thought echoing in all of their minds, burning in their exhausted lungs, was a primal, singular command. Just keep moving. Gavilan's boot hit the final massive stone tier of the summit. He raised his weapon instinctively, bracing himself against the raging storm, his eyes scanning the darkness for the roaring sacrificial pyres and the boy who had led them here. But Lucio was already gone. There was no altar. There was no fire. Before Sapo, Rico, or Mace could pull themselves over the final step, the oppressive, crushing roar of the ancient storm ceased. It didn't fade. It was simply deleted. The driving rain, the suffocating heat, and the scent of the bloody river vanished entirely. The change was instantaneous, cutting them out of the antediluvian nightmare with the brutal, jarring suddenness of a film reel snapping in the dark.
You still think of time as a road, Lieutenant. A straight line you drive down until you either crash or run out of gas.
Lucio's voice came from behind them.
But the master understands that a straight line is a waste of a perfectly good tragedy. The idea was never a place you travel through. It is what is seen, tracing through the grooves of a record. And you are just like the music.
The freezing basalt of the ziggurat was gone. The torrential rain and the suffocating pressure of the ancient world had vanished, replaced by the dry, warm wind of the Sonoran desert. The smell of rotting silt was chased away by the scent of dry sagebrush and baked earth.
The master does not destroy.
Lucho's voice purred, vibrating against the back of Gavilan's eyes.
Destruction is an ending, and endings will always be someone's beginning. Welcome to the Master's Archives.
Gavilan fell to his knees in the dust, the dry dirt puffing up around his tactical boots. The sudden shift in gravity and temperature left him violently dizzy. He gripped his carbine, his knuckles white, and forced himself to look up. They were on a high rocky ridge. Below them, bathed in the fading orange light of dusk, was the hacienda. It was completely pristine. The sprawling whitewashed walls were unblemished. The heavy iron gates stood closed and secure. There was no smoke rising from the courtyard, no shattered glass in the foyer windows, no blood soaking into the manicured lawns. The compound sat silent and heavy in the desert twilight, exactly as it had looked hours or lifetimes ago. Mace stumbled forward, dropping her rifle entirely. It clattered against the rocks. She didn't reach for it. She just stared down at the compound, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps.
No,
She whispered, shaking her head.
no, we already did this. We breached the gates. We lost them in there.
Sapo stood frozen. The heavy machine gun felt like dead weight. The silence of the desert was deafening. The cicadas were chirping in the scrub brush, a painfully normal, earthly sound that felt like a mockery after the roaring of the antediluvian storm. And just then, they heard the low, mechanical growl of heavy engines. Snaking their way up the long, winding dirt road toward the hacienda's main gates was a convoy of vehicles. 7 black armored SUVs, their headlights cutting through the gathering dusk, moving in a tight, aggressive tactical formation. Rico dropped to his stomach in the dirt, his hands trembling violently as he pulled a high-powered digital optic from his vest. He pressed it to his eye, zooming in on the lead vehicle as it kicked up a long trail of amber dust. Through the magnified green tint of the lens, Rico saw the driver of the lead SUV. It was Tortuga, his massive hands resting easily on the steering wheel, his face set in a mask of calm focus. In the passenger seat sat Gavilan, holding a radio to his mouth, giving the final breach orders. In the back, Rico could see himself, checking the battery on his comms unit, sitting right next to Padre, who was silently thumbing a rosary. "Boss," Rico choked out, his voice cracking, tears cutting lines through the mud and blood dried on his face. He lowered the optic, unable to look anymore. "Boss, it's us. It's the convoy." Standing on the ridge, the 4 remaining ghosts of Gavilan's army watched in absolute silence as army drove willingly into the open jaws of the archives, ready to start the slaughter all over again. As the convoy continued its slow, steady crawl toward the hacienda below, completely ignorant of the ghosts watching them from the ridge, a melody cut through the dry desert wind. It started as a soft rhythmic hum, building into a quiet and acoustic rhythm. It was Lucho singing. His voice was beautiful, melodic, and impossibly clear, carrying the mournful, romantic cadence of a traditional bolero. The lyrics drifted over the scrub brush and the baked earth, slow and haunting. Sapo's massive shoulders went entirely rigid. The heavy machine gun, the weapon he had treated like an extension of his own body for a decade, slipped from his numb fingers and hit the dirt with a heavy thud. He knew that song. He slowly turned his head to look at the boy. Lucho was standing a few feet away, staring back at the heavy gunner. As Sapo made eye contact, the boy's lips stopped moving, but the song didn't stop. The melody continued to echo through the twilight, sourceless and omnipresent, wrapping around them like a suffocating blanket. Lucho's face contorted. The corners of his mouth stretched upward, pulling his pale skin taut against his cheekbones in a smile of pure, unadulterated malice. It was the smile of a predator that didn't just have you in its jaws, but had been chewing on you for hours before you even noticed. Sappho stared at that impossible smile, his breath shuddering in his chest. His mind violently began to rewound, snapping back to the passenger seat of the armored truck hours ago. He remembered the static on the radio. He remembered tapping his fingers against the dashboard. He remembered Mace and the look of sheer confusion on her face when she told him the radio was off.
There's no music playing.
The trap hadn't been sprung in the foyer. The house hadn't caught them when they breached the doors. The idea had reached out and claimed them on the highway miles away, coming to them through the static. They were dead before they even parked the cars. "My sister's wedding song," Sappho whispered. The words tasted like ash. The sheer, incomprehensible scale of the master's cruelty came crashing down on him. There was no fighting a labyrinth that manipulated time like clay. There was no shooting a monster that was already wearing your memories. For the first time since the raid began, Sappho wasn't confused. He wasn't hallucinating. He wasn't full of adrenaline. He just felt empty. He was just broken. The despair was a physical weight, heavier than the antediluvian rain, heavier than the iron forest. It was the absolute certainty that they would do this forever, bleeding out in 100 different rooms for the amusement of an archive that would never, ever let them die. Mace, who had collapsed into the dirt beside him, saw the catastrophic shift in his eyes, and she recognized what he did. Sappho had heard music before they had ever gotten to the hacienda.
Sappho.
She said sternly, scrambling to her feet, her hands reaching out in a desperate panic.
Sappho. No, done.
She didn't have time to finish. It has all happened in moments. Sappho didn't look at the convoy below. He didn't look at Gavilan, who was still kneeling in the dust. He looked only at the desert sky, finding a small, final measure of control in a universe that had stripped everything else away. His hand moved with the blinding practice speed of a cartel veteran. He unholstered his sidearm, smoothly cleared the safety, and pressed the cold steel of the barrel directly to his temple. The crack of the gunshot was deafening. It tore through the haunting melody, echoing violently across the canyon and rolling over the oblivious convoy below. Sappho's massive frame crumpled, hitting the ridge with the finality of a felled oak. The desert sand, thirsty and parched, eagerly drank the fresh dark stain spreading beneath his head, pulling the last true ounce of his humanity into the dirt.